You are hereby ordered to pay $5 million in restitution. Effective immediately, Judge Malcolm Reinhardt declared with a smug grin, slamming the gavel with theatrical arrogance. Court is adjourned. Unless, of course, Ms. Jefferson has some invisible billionaire hiding in her purse. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. The sound of gasps and nervous whispers echoed off the cherrywood panels. Camille Jefferson didn't flinch. She sat still, back straight, chin high, hands folded in her lap like she'd rehearsed the scene in her head 1,000 times. Her lawyer, a young black woman fresh out of law school, blinked hard as if she'd heard it wrong. Your Honor, that's absurd. There's been no proof of wrongdoing. The forensic accountant literally testified in our favor, and I've overruled it. Judge Reinhardt snapped, wiping his glasses as though annoyed by the interruption. In my courtroom, character outweighs conjecture, and your client's connections raise more red flags than a Beijing parade. The gallery chuckled. Not everyone, but enough. Camille's eyes didn't budge from the judge's face. Her lips were motionless, but her silence wasn't submission, it was strategy. Every second she spent not reacting made Reinhardt sweat a little more, though he didn't show it yet. Across the room, the prosecutor, Ron Dellard, a greasy white man with a reputation for targeting minorities with vague financial charges, smirked and whispered something to his assistant. Camille's phone vibrated once in her purse. She didn't check it. Not yet. Judge Reinhardt stood, towering behind the bench. His white hair gleamed beneath the courtroom lighting. Ms. Jefferson, let this serve as a reminder. Your fancy degrees and military family won't protect you from accountability. This isn't the Pentagon. This is real America. Camille slowly rose to her feet. She adjusted the single gold bracelet on her wrist. An Army medal turned into jewelry by her father, Colonel Langston Jefferson. The judge's eyes briefly landed on it before returning to his papers. Bailiff, escort her out. We'll be confiscating her accounts by close of business today. Reinhardt added. She can cry about it on her next Ivy League podcast. Her lawyer whispered, Camille, we can appeal. This isn't over. But Camille didn't respond. Instead, she turned calmly, her heels echoing against the courtroom floor like clock hands counting down to something no one else saw coming. As she passed Judge Reinhardt's bench, she looked him in the eyes for the first time. You're right, she said, voice crisp. This isn't the Pentagon. He smirked again. Glad we agree. She leaned in ever so slightly, her tone like sharpened steel. But it's about to be. The judge froze, but only for a second. Outside the courtroom, reporters waited. Camille walked past them like fog, graceful, untouchable, unreadable. Her hand dipped into her purse and pulled out her phone. One contact, one button. Dad, she said quietly into the receiver. It's time. Camille stood at the bottom of the courthouse steps, the sun slicing between government buildings like a spotlight. She didn't rush. Her phone was pressed to her ear, and her voice remained calm, calmer than it should have been for someone who'd just been fined $5 million by a courtroom soaked in arrogance and old money corruption. It's time, she said again, this time slower. There was a pause. Then a voice low, gravelly, clipped with military precision, answered from the other end. Stay where you are, Camille. No appeals, no press, no movement. Just breathe. I'll handle this. She didn't nod, didn't even blink. The people passing her on the sidewalk had no idea what kind of detonation was being wired into place with a simple father-daughter exchange. She tucked the phone away and stood motionless for a few seconds more. Then, with surgeon-like intent, she walked toward the black SUV waiting near the street. 3 minutes later and nearly 800 miles away, Colonel Langston Jefferson stood inside a secure wing of the Pentagon, overlooking a digital warboard glowing with intelligence feeds and classified operations. The glass walls reflected his stern face, his jaw locked tight, eyes focused not on global enemies but on something far more personal, domestic rot. Pull the Reinhardt file, he said without turning. A young analyst at the operations table froze. Sir, I said. The colonel barked. Pull the Reinhardt file and notify Office of Inspector General. Category red. Silence followed. The analyst tapped keys, and a hidden folder unlocked on the massive screen, labeled Judicial Compromise, Tier 1 Clearance Only. Photos, bank statements, internal memos, bribes, sealed court records. Reinhardt wasn't just racist. He was paid to be. The trail spanned years. He'd tanked cases for money, sold verdicts for favors, and buried black defendants under false financial charges engineered by insiders like Ron Dellard. Camille's case was just the latest in a long string of judicial assassinations. Colonel Jefferson turned to his aide. Prep the files for presidential review. Alert Joint Command. I'll be wheels up in 30. Sir, the aide asked cautiously, should we notify DOJ? No, Jefferson said sharply. Not yet. Too many snakes there. He opened a secure line on a military-encoded phone. One ring. Then a familiar voice answered. This is President Riley. Sir, Jefferson said firmly, we have a situation in the Southern District of Georgia. I'm requesting emergency clearance for a direct Pentagon intervention. I'm en route. Is this about Camille? Yes. The president paused. Do what you need to do, Langston. Full authorization. Click. Back at the courthouse, Camille leaned against the SUV. Her lawyer, eyes still wide from the verdict, whispered frantically. I don't understand. You didn't even fight it. You let them fine you. What are you doing? Camille gave a faint smile, moving in silence. Behind them, court officers began laughing about the verdict. One bailiff jokingly asked the clerk if Camille's jewelry would be taken as down payment. Camille's eyes flicked upward. For the first time that day, her smile changed. It wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile that made grown men check the exits without knowing why. 10 minutes later, from 30,000 feet in the air, a military aircraft tore through the clouds on a direct flight toward Georgia. Inside, Colonel Jefferson strapped on his service cap and reviewed a list of corrupt judges, prosecutors, and officials who'd all touched this case. He'd warned them once before, years ago, about targeting his daughter. Now, they'd see what consequences looked like when a father didn't just serve the law. He commanded the system that wrote it. The courthouse was quieter than usual that afternoon, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. Judge Malcolm Reinhardt had just returned to his chambers, sipping a lukewarm coffee while flipping through a legal journal with zero concern in the world. The courtroom's earlier ruling, slamming a $5 million fine on Camille Jefferson, had been more than just business as usual. For Reinhardt, it was tradition. Another young black life broken. Another lesson taught. Another reminder that the gavel in his hand was heavier than any truth. But 10 miles out and closing fast, thunder rumbled. Not from clouds, but rotor blades. 2 Black Hawk helicopters swept across the Georgia skyline. Their matte black frames sliced through the air like missiles wrapped in steel. Below them, a military convoy of armored SUVs weaved through traffic, escorted by local police who'd been informed only that it was a federal matter and to stay out of the way. Inside the lead SUV sat Colonel Langston Jefferson, eyes locked on a dossier file in his lap, his uniform crisp, his stars gleaming. As the courthouse came into view, he closed the file, placed it in a sealed briefcase, and spoke only once. Protocol 19. Activate it now. The SUV peeled into the courthouse plaza. Soldiers stepped out in uniform, not weapons drawn, but with presence so commanding that even the sidewalk chatter died on sight. Inside, security buzzed with confusion. Who the hell are they? One bailiff whispered as military personnel flooded the building. Seconds later, the courtroom doors burst open. Not violently, but with authority that made every head turn. Colonel Jefferson walked in, flanked by 2 Pentagon officers and a federal court observer from D.C. Judge Reinhardt, caught mid-sentence in a sidebar with Prosecutor Dellard, looked up and blinked. What is the meaning of this? He barked, standing. This is my courtroom. Jefferson didn't stop walking. He approached the bench, stopped 10 feet away, and handed a sealed order to the bailiff, who instinctively took it and stepped back like it burned. This court is hereby placed under Pentagon observation per federal directive. All proceedings are suspended, and you, the colonel pointed directly at Reinhardt, are relieved of all judicial duties pending criminal investigation. The silence was unbearable. Dellard stammered. Wait. What authority? Who gave this order? Jefferson turned, almost casually, and spoke without raising his voice. The president. He tossed another folder onto the prosecutor's desk, thick, filled with years of surveillance logs, wiretaps, and bank records. Ronald Dellard, you've prosecuted 42 black defendants in the past 5 years using manipulated evidence and forged affidavits. That stops today. Judge Reinhardt tried to speak but was interrupted by the courtroom doors opening again. This time it was Camille. She stepped in, graceful and untouched, watching the man who found her hours earlier now sweating behind the bench like a cornered animal. You think you know power, Jefferson said, stepping closer to Reinhardt. But power isn't what you abuse in silence. Power is what answers the phone when injustice touches blood. 2 federal officers moved toward Reinhardt with handcuffs. He backed up against his chair. You can't do this. I'm a judge. This is unconstitutional. Jefferson raised an eyebrow. Then you should have read the Constitution before weaponizing your robe. As Reinhardt was taken into custody and Dellard was escorted out, the room buzzed not with gossip, but awe. And Camille? She never looked at Reinhardt again. She only looked forward, because this was only the beginning. 3 days later, the courthouse that once fined Camille Jefferson $5 million was no longer a courthouse at all. The federal government had shut down its operations entirely. The stained bench where Judge Reinhardt once ruled with racist glee had been removed. The judicial seal was stripped from the wall. In its place, a temporary banner now hung, emblazoned with bold black letters. U.S. Department of Justice, Reconstruction Division. Media vans crowded the street. Protesters and supporters gathered by the thousands. The world had watched as the Pentagon descended on a corrupt court, dismantled a racist empire, and exposed systemic abuse in real time. Now, the world was about to hear from the young woman who stood at the center of it all. Camille Jefferson stepped onto the makeshift stage outside the now-defunct courthouse. No podium, no teleprompter, just a microphone, and a voice that couldn't be fined, silenced, or dismissed. She looked out across the sea of faces. Some held signs, some held children, some held back tears. She took a breath. 3 days ago, I stood in this building and was told that my future could be priced at $5 million. The crowd went quiet. I was told my value was determined by a gavel swung with prejudice, by a man who had no business wearing a robe. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't cry. I just made a call. She paused. That call wasn't about privilege. It wasn't about connections. It was about proof that when a system fails its people, those people have every right to burn that system to the ground and build something better. A cheer erupted, raw and rising. This was never about me, she continued. It was about all the names you'll never read in headlines. All the black girls who sat alone in cold courtrooms while corrupt judges whispered numbers into their futures. All the families bankrupted by lies disguised as legal decisions. This wasn't an exception. It was exposure. Her eyes hardened. And exposure demands consequence. Behind her, a massive screen projected live footage of the arrests continuing across the country. Lawyers, judges, funders, each caught in the web that Camille and her father had detonated from the inside. My father didn't just come to defend me. He came to dismantle the disease. And now we rebuild. More applause. Some in the crowd were crying. Camille stepped back from the mic. Reporters shouted questions, but she ignored them. Instead, she turned to the Justice Department officials beside her and handed over a folder. Inside was a list of every defendant wrongfully fined, jailed, or dismissed under Reinhardt's rule. Start here, she said. One official nodded. We will. As the crowd surged with energy, a quiet moment passed between Camille and her father. You did more than survive, he told her. She smiled faintly. So did you. No, Jefferson said, putting a hand on her back as they walked away. We didn't just survive. We ended a war without firing a bullet. And now, it's their turn to feel powerless. As father and daughter disappeared into the sea of supporters, The screen behind them shifted again, this time showing a presidential press conference. President Riley stepped to the podium. Effective immediately, I have signed an executive order mandating full judicial reviews across all federal districts flagged for systemic bias. This is the beginning of a new legal era, one forged not in secrecy, but in accountability. History had turned, and it had turned in Camille's name, from silence to spotlight, from victim to vanguard, from courtroom target to national symbol. Because when justice fails and power ignores truth, sometimes the only way forward is to make the system fear the people again.